The notification chimed at exactly 11:47 p.m. while I was under the hood of my '89 Mustang, grease coating my knuckles like war paint. The garage smelled of motor oil and old dreams, tools scattered across the workbench like the remnants of a life I thought I understood. "Don't come right now. I want to spend time with my ex-husband and our kids." I stared at Ayla's message, the phone screen casting blue shadows across my oil-stained fingers. 22 years of marriage. And this is what it came down to. A casual text, dismissive as ordering takeout. I didn't reply. Instead, I saved the message, noted the timestamp, and walked to my filing cabinet. The property deed sat in the top drawer, yellowed with age, but crystal clear in its language. Sole ownership, inherited from my grandfather, before Ayla and I ever met. Before I knew that love could turn into something cold and calculating. My name is Jared Sollace, and I run a tech repair business in Edgewater, Ohio, a Rust Belt town where everyone knows your business before you do. I've spent the last 15 years fixing other people's broken electronics, while my own life quietly fell apart. Ironic, really. I can resurrect a waterlogged smartphone, but I couldn't save my marriage. The garage felt smaller suddenly, walls pressing in like the town itself. Edgewater had seen better days, back when the steel mill employed half the population and dreams didn't rust quite so easily. Now it was all crumbling facades and whispered gossip, the kind of place where a scandal could spread faster than wildfire. I wiped my hands on a shop rag and headed inside. The house, my house, as the deed clearly stated, felt hollow. Ayla's absence wasn't new, but tonight it carried weight. Her coffee cup sat in the sink, lipstick stain on the rim like a farewell kiss. The kitchen counter held her usual clutter, vitamin bottles, business cards from networking events, a stack of mail I wasn't supposed to open. But tonight, the rules had changed. I opened my laptop and pulled up my attorney's contact information. Richard Henley had handled my grandfather's estate and various business contracts over the years. A steady man with steel-gray hair and the kind of quiet competence that comes from decades of small-town legal battles. The clock read 12:15 a.m. when I finished typing the email. Subject line: Urgent consultation required. I attached screenshots of Ayla's text, the property deed and our marriage certificate. Evidence, documentation. The paper trail that would unravel 22 years in a matter of weeks. My phone buzzed again. Another message from Ayla. "Wade thinks it would be good for the kids to see their parents getting along. We might extend the trip a few days." Wade. Her first husband, father to Cassie and Tyler from her previous life. The golden boy who'd played semi-pro baseball before a shoulder injury sent him spiraling into a series of failed businesses and broken promises. He'd reappeared 6 months ago, claiming he wanted to reconnect with his children. Ayla had been supportive, understanding, everything a mature second wife should be. I'd been the fool who believed in second chances. The house creaked around me, old bones settling into familiar positions. I walked through rooms that suddenly felt like crime scenes, looking for clues I'd missed. How long had this been planned? The casual way she'd dismissed me, the assumption that I'd simply accept her decision, it reeked of rehearsal. In our bedroom, I found her jewelry box open, several expensive pieces missing. Her passport was gone from the desk drawer. The overnight bag she'd claimed to pack for a simple weekend trip had apparently held enough for an extended vacation. I sat on the edge of our bed, the mattress dipping under weight that felt heavier than it should. The digital clock glowed red in the darkness. 1:33 a.m. Somewhere across town, maybe across the state, my wife was playing happy family with the man she'd once promised to forget. But Ayla had underestimated me. She saw the quiet tech repair guy, the man who fixed broken things and kept his mouth shut. She didn't see the strategist, the problem solver who'd built a business from nothing and navigated every challenge this fading town could throw at him. I opened the nightstand drawer and pulled out a small notebook, the kind I used for tracking complicated repairs. On the first page, I wrote the date and time. Below that, I began documenting everything: the texts, the missing items, the timeline of her recent behavior. Every detail that might matter when lawyers started asking questions. The garage called me back around 2 a.m. I needed to think, and I always thought better with my hands busy. The Mustang's engine had been giving me trouble for weeks, a perfect metaphor for everything else in my life. But engines could be fixed with the right tools and enough patience. Unlike marriages, apparently. I worked until dawn, replacing spark plugs and cleaning fuel injectors while my mind processed the new reality. Ayla wanted time with her ex-husband and their kids. She wanted me to disappear, to become invisible while she played out whatever fantasy had been growing in her head. She'd get her wish, but not the way she expected. At 7 a.m., I called Richard Henley's office and left a voicemail. Professional, calm, no hint of the rage building in my chest like steam in an overheated radiator. Then I called my real estate agent, Patricia Morrison, a sharp-eyed woman who'd sold half the houses in Edgewater and knew how to move property fast when circumstances demanded it. "Jared?" Patricia's voice carried surprise. "It's early, even for you." "I need to list the house," I said. "Today, if possible." A pause. "Is everything all right? You and Ayla seemed happy at the Miller's barbecue last month." The Miller's barbecue, where Ayla had played the perfect wife, laughing at my jokes and holding my hand while she planned her escape. The memory tasted bitter now, like coffee left too long on the burner. "Things change," I said. "Can you come by this afternoon for photos?" "Of course. Jared, if you need to talk, just business, Patricia. I'll have the paperwork ready." I spent the morning boxing documents, redirecting mail to a post office box I'd rented years ago for business purposes. Utility companies, insurance providers, the homeowners association. Everyone needed to know that Jared Sollace was taking control of his own property. The house felt different as I worked, less like a home and more like a stage set being struck after the final performance. 22 years of shared meals, arguments, quiet Sunday mornings reading newspapers in bed, all of it reduced to boxes and legal documents. My phone rang around noon. Ayla's ringtone, the one I'd programmed to play "Here Comes the Sun," because she used to hum it while making breakfast. Now it sounded like mockery. "Jared?" I tried calling earlier. "I was busy," I said, not bothering to explain that I'd been busy dismantling our life together. "Wade's been really great with the kids. They're having such a good time, and I think it's important for them to see that divorce doesn't have to mean hatred." "Interesting perspective," I said, watching Patricia's car pull into the driveway. "Anything else?" "We're thinking of staying through the weekend, maybe longer. Wade found this amazing cabin by the lake, and the kids love it. You don't mind, do you?" "Mind?" I almost laughed. She was asking permission to extend her betrayal, seeking my blessing for whatever game she was playing. "Take all the time you need," I said. "Really. Don't worry about me." "You're the best, Jared. I knew you'd understand." The best. 22 years, and I'd earned the title of most convenient husband. Understanding, accommodating, invisible when necessary. Patricia knocked on the front door, camera bag slung over her shoulder and tablet in hand. Professional smile, but her eyes held questions she was too polite to ask. "Ready to make this happen?" she said, more than ready. We spent 2 hours staging rooms, adjusting lighting, capturing angles that would make the house irresistible to potential buyers. Patricia worked with the efficiency of someone who'd done this 1,000 times, but I caught her studying me when she thought I wasn't looking. "Market's strong right now," she said as we finished. "Location's good, house is solid. We should have offers within the week." "How fast can we close?" "Eager to move?" "Just planning ahead." She nodded, but the questions in her eyes remained. In a town like Edgewater, secrets had a short lifespan. By tomorrow, half the neighborhood would know the Sollace house was for sale. By the weekend, They'd be speculating about why. Let them speculate. I had work to do. That evening, I received Richard Henley's response to my email. Brief, professional, and exactly what I needed to hear. Documentation looks solid. Can file petition Monday morning. Call me. I poured myself 3 fingers of bourbon, the good stuff I'd been saving for special occasions, and sat in my garage, surrounded by tools and the smell of honest work. The Mustang purred like a satisfied cat, engine troubles resolved through patience and the right application of force. If only marriages were so simple. My phone buzzed with another text from Ayla. Wade says hi. The kids want to know if you can send their summer clothes. We might stay longer than planned. I stared at the message, bourbon warming my throat and clarity settling over me like a comfortable blanket. She wanted her extended family vacation. She wanted me to play the supportive ex-husband, shipping clothes and enabling whatever fantasy she'd constructed. She wanted me to disappear. Instead, I deleted her message without responding and opened my laptop. The divorce petition stared back at me, 30 pages of legal language that would transform 22 years of marriage into a series of asset divisions and custody arrangements. I signed my name with a steady hand, each letter sealing our fate. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. Monday morning arrived gray and drizzling, the kind of weather that made Edgewater look like a film noir set. I dressed carefully, my best suit, the navy one Ayla had bought me for her company Christmas party 3 years ago. Ironic armor for the battle ahead. Richard Henley's office occupied the 2nd floor of a converted Victorian on Main Street, sandwiched between a coffee shop and a store that sold antiques nobody wanted. The building had character, which in Edgewater meant it was old, drafty, and probably haunted by the ghosts of better economic times. Jared, Richard stood as his secretary ushered me in. I've reviewed your documentation. This is straightforward, but I want to make sure you understand the implications. His office smelled of leather and old books, walls lined with legal volumes that probably hadn't been opened since law school. Richard had been practicing family law in Edgewater for 30 years, long enough to see every variation of human disappointment. Walk me through it, I said, settling into the client chair that had probably witnessed 1,000 similar conversations. The text message establishes abandonment. Ohio law is clear on this. When a spouse voluntarily leaves the marital home for an extended period without consent or justification, it constitutes grounds for divorce. The fact that she specifically told you not to come home strengthens your position. He spread the papers across his desk like a poker hand. Property division should be simple. The house is yours by inheritance, clearly documented. Joint assets will be split according to contribution, and since you've been the primary breadwinner, what about the kids? Cassie and Tyler aren't biologically yours, and Wade is their father. Custody won't be an issue unless you want to pursue visitation rights. I'd helped raise those kids for 15 years, attended school plays and soccer games, taught Tyler how to change a tire, and helped Cassie with her college applications. But in the eyes of the law, I was just the stepfather, easily discarded when biological family reasserted itself. No, I said, let Wade handle his own children. Richard nodded, making notes in his precise handwriting. I'll file this afternoon. Ayla will be served within 48 hours, wherever she is. The house sale can proceed. You have every legal right as sole owner. How long until it's final? 90 days minimum, assuming she doesn't contest. Given the circumstances, I doubt she'll want a prolonged court battle. I signed the necessary papers, each signature another step away from the life I'd thought I was living. Richard's secretary made copies while we discussed strategy, timeline, and the inevitable complications that would arise when Ayla realized her convenient arrangement had legal consequences. One more thing, Richard said as I prepared to leave. Small town like this, word travels fast. You might want to prepare for questions. Questions, as if I owed anyone explanations for defending myself against betrayal. I walked back to my shop through downtown Edgewater, past empty storefronts and businesses hanging on by threads. The coffee shop was busy, retirees and unemployed locals nursing cups and trading gossip like currency. I caught fragments of conversation as I passed. Something about the Henderson divorce, speculation about the new family moving into the Morrison place, complaints about property taxes and the city council. Tomorrow, they'd be talking about me. Sollace Electronics occupied a narrow building between a used bookstore and a tax preparation service that only opened during filing season. I'd bought the place 8 years ago when business was good, and Ayla's first promotion had made us feel invincible. Now, it felt like a fortress, the one place in town where I controlled everything. My assistant, Jenny Martinez, looked up from the front counter as I entered. 25 years old, sharp as a razor, and one of the few people in Edgewater who understood that technology was the future, whether the town wanted to admit it or not. "How'd the lawyer meeting go?" she asked. Jenny was the only person who knew about my situation, mainly because she'd answered the phone when Ayla called looking for me last week. The conversation had been brief and cold, nothing like the warm exchanges they'd shared when Ayla occasionally stopped by the shop. "Filed the papers," I said. "Things might get complicated around here for a while. Want me to handle the phone calls when people start asking questions? Just tell them I'm unavailable for comment." The morning passed quietly, a steady stream of customers bringing broken phones, crashed computers, and malfunctioning tablets. I lost myself in the work, finding peace in problems that could actually be solved. Replace a screen, recover lost data, clean out malware. Simple cause and effect, unlike the tangled mess my personal life had become. Around noon, my phone rang. Unknown number, but the area code was local. Sollace Electronics. "Jared, this is Patricia Morrison. We need to talk." Her voice carried an urgency that made my stomach tighten. "What's wrong?" "I'm at your house. Can you come over? There's been a development." I locked up the shop and drove home through streets that suddenly felt hostile. Neighbors working in their yards looked up as I passed, some waving, others just staring. News traveled fast in small towns, but I hadn't expected it to move this quickly. Patricia's car sat in my driveway next to a white sedan I didn't recognize. She met me at the front door, tablet clutched against her chest like a shield. "We have a problem," she said. Ayla came back. The words hit me like a physical blow. "When?" "About an hour ago. She's inside with some man, not Wade. They're going through the house, taking pictures, making notes. She says you can't sell without her permission." I pushed past Patricia into my own home, anger building like pressure in a steam engine. Voices drifted from the kitchen. Ayla's laugh, bright and artificial, followed by a man's deeper tones. They were sitting at my kitchen table, paperwork spread between them like they owned the place. Ayla looked up as I entered, her expression shifting from surprise to something that might have been guilt. "Jared, you're home early." The man stood, extending his hand with practiced confidence. Tall, expensive suit, the kind of smile that sold insurance and political campaigns. "Trevor Maddox, Morrison and Associates. I represent Mrs. Sollace." I ignored his outstretched hand. "Get out of my house." "Now, Jared," Ayla said, using the tone she'd perfected for dealing with difficult customers. "There's no need to be hostile. Trevor is just helping me understand my rights." "Your rights?" The words came out sharper than I'd intended. "To what? This isn't your house." Trevor consulted his notes, unfazed by my hostility. "Actually, Mr. Sollace, Ohio law recognizes marital property rights regardless of whose name appears on the deed. Any appreciation in value during the marriage, improvements made with joint funds, even the establishment of the home as the primary residence creates shared equity. Legal double talk, designed to confuse and intimidate. But I'd spent years dealing with customers who tried to avoid paying for services. learning to recognize manipulation in all its forms. The house was inherited, I said, before we were married. It's separate property. Improvements, Trevor continued smoothly. New kitchen 3 years ago, bathroom renovation, the deck addition, all funded through joint accounts, which establishes marital investment. Ayla watched our exchange with the detached interest of someone observing a tennis match. This was theater for her benefit, Trevor performing his role while she played the confused wife seeking guidance. "Where are the kids?" I asked. Still with Wade. This is complicated enough without dragging them into it. Complicated. 22 years reduced to a complication that required legal representation and strategic planning. "I want both of you out," I said. "Now." Trevor gathered his papers with deliberate slowness. "We'll be filing an injunction to stop the sale until the court can determine proper asset division. You should expect to be served within 24 hours. They left through the front door, Ayla pausing on the threshold like she wanted to say something. But whatever words she'd prepared died in the face of my stare, and she followed Trevor to his sedan without looking back. Patricia emerged from wherever she'd been hiding during the confrontation. "I'm sorry, Jared. I didn't know what to do when they showed up." "Not your fault," I said, though my voice sounded hollow even to my own ears. "What do you want me to do about the listing?" I watched Trevor's car disappear around the corner, carrying Ayla back to whatever new life she was constructing. The injunction would come tomorrow, tying up the house sale in legal knots that could take months to untangle. Another strategic move in a game I was apparently playing whether I wanted to or not. "Keep it active," I said. "Let them try to stop it." That evening, I called Richard Henley at home. His wife answered, her voice warm with the kind of contentment that comes from 40 years of successful marriage. When Richard came on the line, I could hear television news in the background, the comfortable sounds of domestic routine. "They moved faster than I expected," he said after I explained the afternoon's events. "Trevor Maddox is competent, but he's fishing. The marital property argument is weak given the inheritance documentation. Can they stop the sale?" "Temporarily. But it'll cost them legal fees and give us ammunition for the final settlement. Sometimes the best strategy is to let your opponent overplay their hand." After hanging up, I sat in my garage with the Mustang, engine ticking as it cooled from the drive home. The familiar space felt like the only honest place left in my world, surrounded by tools that served their purpose without deception or hidden agendas. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This doesn't have to be ugly. Call me. A." I deleted the message without responding. Ugly was a choice she'd made when she decided to play house with her ex-husband while keeping me as a backup option. Ugly was bringing a lawyer into my home and pretending to be confused about property rights. If she wanted ugly, I'd show her what ugly really looked like. The injunction arrived Tuesday morning via certified mail, 8 pages of legal language that boiled down to a simple message. The house sale was frozen until the court could sort out marital property claims. I read it twice over coffee that tasted like disappointment, then called Richard Henley. "Expected this," he said. "Trevor's playing for time, hoping you'll cave and offer a settlement. Standard divorce attorney tactics." "How long can they drag this out?" "Months, if they want to. But every delay costs them money, and Ayla doesn't have independent income now that she's taking extended family time." A thought occurred to me, cold and calculating. What about the joint accounts? What about them? She abandoned the marital home. Doesn't that affect her access to marital funds? Richard was quiet for a moment, the sound of pages turning in the background. "Technically, yes. As the remaining spouse in the marital residence, you have the right to control household finances. But that's a nuclear option, Jared. Courts don't like financial manipulation. Even when the other spouse is using those funds to pay lawyers to steal my property." "Point taken. Give me an hour to research the statute." I spent that hour at my shop, pretending to work, while my mind churned through possibilities. Ayla had always been careless with money, assuming it would always be there when she needed it. Her credit cards, the joint checking account, even her car payment, all tied to my business income and my financial management. She'd been so confident in her position, so sure I'd simply accept whatever arrangement she and Trevor devised. The abandoned husband, grateful for whatever scraps they decided to throw him. Time to adjust her expectations. Richard called back with good news. Ohio Statute 3103.003 gives you the right to control joint finances when your spouse abandons the marital home. You can freeze her access immediately. Do it. Jared, think about this. Once you pull that trigger, there's no going back. This becomes total war. Total war. As if it hadn't been war from the moment she texted me to stay away from my own home. Do it, I repeated. By noon, Ayla's access to our joint accounts was suspended. Her credit cards were canceled. The automatic payments for her car loan, insurance, and various subscription services were terminated. 22 years of shared financial responsibility ended with a series of phone calls and electronic signatures. I felt like a surgeon removing a tumor, precise, necessary, and strangely liberating. The first call came at 2:17 p.m. Jared, what the hell did you do? Ayla's voice carried a panic I'd never heard before. My cards aren't working. Financial security, I said calmly. Can't have unauthorized persons accessing marital assets during divorce proceedings. Unauthorized? I'm your wife. Are you? Because last I checked, wives don't abandon their homes to play house with ex-husbands. Silence. Then the sound of muffled conversation. She was with someone, Trevor probably, or maybe Wade, planning their next move while I dismantled their assumptions one by one. This is petty, Jared. We can work this out like adults. Adults communicate. Adults don't send text messages dismissing their spouses like unwanted house guests. I needed time to think. You've got plenty of time now, just not my money to fund your thinking process. I hung up and immediately called my business accountant, Helen Kowalski. She'd been handling my books for 6 years, a no-nonsense woman who understood that money was a tool, not an emotion. I need to restructure some accounts, I told her. Separate business from personal. Establish new banking relationships. Divorce? Pending. Smart move. You want to protect the business assets before lawyers start circling. By the end of the day, Sollace Electronics was financially independent from my personal accounts, which were now separate from anything Ayla could touch. The business had been my creation, built with my labor and my vision. She'd contributed nothing except occasional complaints about the hours I worked. Let Trevor Maddox try to claim half of something she'd never understood or supported. Wednesday brought a new development. Cassie called. Dad, what's going on? Mom's freaking out about money and lawyers. Cassie was 19, home from college for the summer, caught between parents who'd never learned to handle conflict like adults. I'd helped raise her since she was 4, but she was Wade's daughter, not mine. Another relationship severed by legal reality. Your mother and I are having some problems, I said carefully. She says you froze her out of everything. That's not like you. Not like me. The reliable stepfather, the man who paid for things and solved problems without making waves. She was right. It wasn't like the person I'd been. But that person had been taken advantage of, dismissed, and ultimately discarded. Sometimes people change, I said. Can you fix this? Please? Tyler's really upset and Wade doesn't know what to do. Wade doesn't know what to do. The man who'd swept back into Ayla's life with promises and nostalgia couldn't handle the practical consequences of his romantic gestures. Typical. I'm sorry you're caught in the middle, I said, and meant it. But this is between your mother and me. She's staying at Wade's apartment now. It's really small, and everyone's stressed. Wade's apartment. So much for the magical family bonding at the lakeside cabin. Reality had a way of shrinking romantic fantasies down to their true size. That evening, I drove through Edgewater's quiet streets, past houses where families were settling in for dinner and homework and the comfortable routines of functional relationships. The town looked peaceful in the fading light, but I knew the appearance was deceptive. Behind those windows, people were fighting about money and betrayal and the slow erosion of promises they'd once believed would last forever. I parked outside Murphy's Tavern, a dive bar that had been serving Edgewater's disappointed for 40 years, the kind of place where nobody asked questions and everybody minded their own business. The bartender, Danny Kowalski, Helen's younger brother, nodded as I took a stool at the far end. We'd known each other since high school, back when the future had seemed full of possibilities instead of legal complications. "Heard you're having some trouble," Danny said, pouring bourbon without being asked. "Word travels fast. Small town, people talk." He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "For what it's worth, most folks think Ayla's making a mistake. Most folks don't know the whole story. Don't need to. You've been solid for 20 years, never caused problems, always helped when people needed it. That counts for something." The bourbon burned warm and honest, unlike everything else in my life lately. "Appreciate it. Wade's been in here a few times since he came back. Talks big about second chances and family values, but he drinks like a man with regrets." Interesting. The golden boy wasn't as confident as he appeared. What kind of regrets? The kind that come from realizing you can't go back. He's got 2 kids who barely know him, an ex-wife who's not the same person she was 15 years ago, and no real plan beyond hoping nostalgia will fix everything. I sipped my bourbon and considered this information. Wade had always been the type who acted first and dealt with consequences later. It's what had ended their first marriage and derailed his baseball career. Some people never learned that actions had prices. He asked about me? Couple times. Wanted to know what kind of man you were, whether you'd fight for your marriage. Danny grinned. Told him he'd find out soon enough. My phone buzzed with another text from the unknown number. "We need to talk. This is getting out of hand." "A." I showed the message to Danny, who shook his head. "She's scared. Probably just realized that playing house doesn't pay the bills." "Let her be scared." "You sure about this path, Jared? Once you go full scorched earth, there's no walking it back." I finished my bourbon and left money on the bar. She made the choice when she decided I was disposable. I'm just honoring her decision. Outside, Edgewater's streets were empty except for teenagers hanging around the gas station and older residents walking dogs before bedtime. Normal people living normal lives, dealing with normal problems. I envied them their simplicity. My phone rang as I reached the Mustang, Richard Henley's number. "Got some interesting news," he said. "Trevor Maddox filed a motion for emergency spousal support. Claims Ayla is suffering financial hardship due to your vindictive actions." Vindictive? His word. But here's the thing. To get emergency support, they have to prove she can't support herself. That means admitting she abandoned the marriage to live with another man. I smiled for the first time in days. They're painting themselves into a corner. Exactly. Either she's a victim who needs financial support, or she's an independent woman making her own choices. Can't be both. When's the hearing? Friday morning. Judge Morrison, no relation to your real estate agent. He's fair, but doesn't tolerate games. This could go very well for us. After hanging up, I sat in the Mustang and watched Edgewater settle into evening quiet. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, more legal maneuvering, and probably another attempt by Ayla to negotiate from a position she didn't understand was already lost. But tonight, for the first time since this started, I felt like I was winning. The game was just beginning. Friday morning arrived with the kind of crisp clarity that made promises it couldn't keep. I dressed in my second-best suit, the charcoal one that said serious businessman without screaming trying too hard, and drove to the courthouse through streets that felt like a gauntlet. Edgewater's courthouse was a monument to better times, built in 1923 when the town believed in its own future. Now it served mostly traffic violations and small claims disputes, the occasional divorce that couldn't be settled over coffee and wounded pride. Richard Henley met me in the lobby, briefcase in hand and confidence radiating from his pressed shirt and perfectly knotted tie. "Ready for this?" "More than ready." We climbed marble steps worn smooth by decades of legal proceedings, past portraits of judges who'd presided over the town's decline with varying degrees of competence. The family court occupied the second floor, a smaller courtroom that had witnessed more broken promises than a politician's campaign headquarters. Ayla sat at the plaintiff's table with Trevor Maddox, her posture rigid with the kind of tension that came from realizing you'd miscalculated badly. She wore a conservative blue dress I'd never seen before, probably borrowed for the occasion. The woman who'd dismissed me via text message was now playing the role of abandoned wife seeking justice. Judge Morrison entered precisely at 9 a.m., a thin man with silver hair and the weary expression of someone who'd heard every variation of human disappointment. He reviewed the files with practiced efficiency, then looked up at the assembled lawyers. "This is a motion for emergency spousal support," he said. "Mr. Maddox, you have 15 minutes to make your case." Trevor stood, consulting notes that probably cost Ayla more per hour than most Edgewater residents made in a day. "Your Honor, my client is the victim of financial abuse. Mr. Sollace has cut off her access to marital funds, canceled her credit cards, and left her unable to meet basic living expenses." "Where is Mrs. Sollace currently residing?" "With family, Your Honor. Temporary arrangements while this matter is resolved." Judge Morrison's eyebrows rose slightly. "What family?" Trevor hesitated, recognizing the trap but unable to avoid it. "Her former husband and their children." "I see. And why isn't she residing in the marital home?" Another pause. She felt it was best to give both parties space during this difficult time. "Did Mr. Sollace ask her to leave?" "Not explicitly, Your Honor." Judge Morrison turned to Richard. "Mr. Henley, your response?" Richard stood with the calm confidence of a man holding 4 aces. "Your Honor, Mrs. Sollace abandoned the marital home voluntarily. In fact, she sent Mr. Sollace a text message specifically instructing him not to come home because she wanted to spend time with her former husband and their children." He produced a blown-up copy of Ayla's text message, the words stark and undeniable on the courtroom screen. I watched her face crumble as her own words condemned her. "Furthermore," Richard continued, "Ohio Statute 31003.03 clearly gives the remaining spouse the right to control household finances when abandonment occurs. Mr. Sollace has done nothing illegal or vindictive. He's simply protecting marital assets during divorce proceedings that Mrs. Sollace's actions necessitated." Judge Morrison studied the text message, then looked directly at Ayla. "Mrs. Sollace, did you send this message?" "Yes, Your Honor, but—" "Did Mr. Sollace ask you to leave the marital home?" "No, Your Honor, but the situation was complicated." "Did you choose to reside with your former husband instead of returning home?" Trevor whispered urgently in her ear, but Ayla's composure was cracking. "Yes, Your Honor." Judge Morrison leaned back in his chair, decision already written on his face. "Motion for emergency spousal support is denied. Mrs. Sollace voluntarily abandoned the marital home to live with another man. She cannot claim financial hardship resulting from choices she made freely." The gavel came down like a gunshot. Trevor gathered his papers with the mechanical movements of a lawyer who'd just lost a case he should have won easily. Ayla sat frozen, probably calculating how much this legal disaster had cost her. "Furthermore," Judge Morrison added, "I'm scheduling a case management conference for next Friday. Both parties will come prepared to discuss settlement terms. I don't want to see this case drag out over petty grievances. Outside the courthouse, Richard couldn't contain his satisfaction. That was beautiful. Trevor walked right into every trap we set. What happens next? They'll try to negotiate. Ayla's position is untenable now. She can't claim abandonment when she's the one who left, and she can't claim financial abuse when she chose to live with another man. Across the parking lot, I watched Ayla and Trevor having what appeared to be a heated discussion next to his sedan. Her gestures were sharp, angry, while he maintained the calm demeanor of a professional delivering bad news to a client who refused to accept reality. Think she'll try to come back? To the house? Probably. But legally, you have no obligation to let her return. She made her choice. I drove back to my shop through downtown Edgewater, past the coffee shop where retirees were undoubtedly dissecting the morning's courthouse drama. News of the hearing would spread through town like smoke, carrying with it the delicious scandal of a local wife who'd left her husband for her ex, and then tried to claim victim status. Small towns loved their morality plays, especially when they featured familiar characters and clear villains. Jenny looked up as I entered Sollace Electronics, her expression mixing curiosity with concern. How'd it go? Better than expected. Good, because you've had about 15 calls this morning from people who suddenly need urgent tech support. I smiled grimly. Let me guess. They all want to know about the hearing. Pretty much. Mrs. Henderson called twice about her tablet that's been working fine for months. Bob Miller wants you to look at his phone even though he just bought it last week. Edgewater's gossip network was more efficient than any social media platform. By noon, everyone in town would know that Ayla Sollace had been publicly humiliated in court, that her emergency motion had been denied, and that Judge Morrison had essentially called her a woman who'd abandoned her marriage for another man. The phone rang again. Jenny answered with practiced professionalism, then covered the mouthpiece. Patricia Morrison. Says it's urgent. I took the call in my office, surrounded by the comfortable clutter of repair manuals and electronic components. Patricia. Jared, we need to talk. Something's happened with the house. My stomach dropped. What kind of something? Someone broke in last night, ransacked the place, took some things. Police are here now. I closed the shop and drove home through streets that suddenly felt hostile. Police cars in my driveway, neighbors gathered on sidewalks like vultures waiting for carrion. The house that had been my sanctuary was now a crime scene. Officer Martinez, no relation to Jenny, met me at the front door. Mid-40s, competent-looking, the kind of cop who'd seen enough domestic disputes to recognize the patterns. Mr. Sollace, I'm investigating the break-in. When did you last check the house? Yesterday evening, around 7. Notice anything unusual? Cars you didn't recognize? People hanging around? I thought about Trevor's sedan in my driveway earlier in the week, about Ayla's confident assumption that she could waltz back into my life whenever convenient. What was taken? That's what we need to figure out. House was searched pretty thoroughly. Drawers dumped, closets emptied, papers scattered, but it doesn't look like a typical burglary. He was right. The television was untouched, my laptop still sat on the kitchen counter, and my tools remained organized in the garage. Someone had been looking for something specific, not grabbing valuable items to fence. Any idea what they might have been after? Officer Martinez asked. I walked through rooms that felt violated, seeing my possessions scattered like evidence of a life that no longer made sense. In the bedroom, Ayla's remaining clothes were strewn across the floor. In my office, filing cabinets had been opened and documents scattered. Financial records, I said. Bank statements, property documents, business files. Someone looking for leverage in your divorce? The question hung in the air like an accusation. Officer Martinez had probably heard about the morning's court hearing. News traveled fast in small towns, especially news involving public humiliation and legal defeats. Possibly. We'll dust for prints, but I have to ask, do you have any reason to suspect your wife might have been involved? The question I'd been dreading. Accusing Ayla of breaking into her own former home would sound petty, vindictive, exactly the kind of thing a bitter ex-husband would claim. But the timing was suspicious, and the selective nature of the search suggested someone familiar with the house layout. "She has keys," I said carefully. "But she doesn't live here anymore, right? Voluntarily left to stay with family?" "That's correct." Officer Martinez made notes, his expression neutral but his questions pointed. "We'll investigate thoroughly. In the meantime, you might want to consider changing the locks." After the police left, I stood in my violated home and felt something cold settle in my chest. The legal humiliation hadn't been enough. Someone, Ayla, Trevor, Wade, or all of them, had decided to escalate this into criminal territory. They'd made a mistake. The scared, accommodating husband was gone, replaced by someone who understood that wars were won through superior strategy and ruthless execution. I called a locksmith, then spent the afternoon cleaning up the mess and inventorying what had been disturbed. They'd been looking for something specific, financial documents that might give them leverage or evidence they could use to challenge the property division. What they'd found instead was a house that belonged completely to me, protected by inheritance law and their own legal missteps. By evening, the locks were changed and the house was secure. I sat in my garage with a bourbon, surrounded by tools that served their purpose without deception or hidden agendas. My phone buzzed with a text from the unknown number. "This has gone too far. We need to stop before someone gets hurt. A." I stared at the message, then typed my response. "You're right. It has gone too far. You should have thought about that before breaking into my house." The reply came quickly. "That wasn't me." "Sure it wasn't." "Jared, please, can we meet? Just talk?" I deleted the conversation without responding. Talk was what married people did. We were adversaries now, and adversaries communicated through lawyers and court orders. The game had changed, but I was still winning. The case management conference arrived with unseasonable heat, the kind of oppressive humidity that made Edgewater feel like a pressure cooker ready to explode. I dressed in my best suit, the one I'd worn to my grandfather's funeral and my wedding, and prepared for what Richard Henley called the end game. "Settlement conferences are where divorces get resolved," he'd explained during our preparation meeting. "Judge Morrison will push both sides toward compromise. The question is how much Ayla's willing to concede." The courthouse steps felt like a battlefield as I climbed them, each footfall echoing off marble worn smooth by decades of legal proceedings. Inside, the family courtroom buzzed with nervous energy, lawyers conferring with clients, court reporters checking equipment, and the general atmosphere of lives about to be permanently altered. Ayla sat at the plaintiff's table wearing a different conservative dress, this one black with simple jewelry that suggested respectability and victimhood. She'd lost weight in the past week, stress carving hollows under her eyes that makeup couldn't quite hide. Next to her, Trevor Maddox shuffled papers with the mechanical precision of a lawyer who knew his case was falling apart. But there was a third person at their table, a woman I didn't recognize. Mid-40s, expensive suit, the kind of predatory confidence that came from years of high-stakes legal warfare. She whispered urgently to Trevor while studying documents that looked far more extensive than anything we'd seen before. "Who's the new player?" I asked Richard. He frowned, consulting his notes. "Not sure. Trevor didn't mention bringing co-counsel." Judge Morrison entered at precisely 10 a.m., his expression suggesting he'd rather be anywhere else. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're here to discuss settlement terms in the matter of Sollace versus Sollace. Before we begin, I see we have new counsel present." The unknown woman stood with practiced grace. "Margaret Chen, Your Honor, representing Mrs. Sollace in matters related to business asset valuation and hidden income investigation." Hidden income investigation. The words hit me like a physical blow, their implications spreading through my mind like poison. They'd brought in a specialist, someone who made a living finding money that people tried to hide during divorce proceedings. "Mr. Henley," Judge Morrison said, "were you aware of this development?" "No, Your Honor. This is the first we've heard of any business asset investigation." Margaret Chen smiled with the warmth of a shark scenting wounded prey. "Your Honor, our preliminary investigation has uncovered significant discrepancies in Mr. Sollace's financial disclosures. We believe he's been systematically hiding income through his business operations." Richard stood quickly. "Your Honor, this is a fishing expedition. Mr. Sollace has provided complete financial documentation." "Documentation that appears to be incomplete," Chen interrupted smoothly. "For instance, Mr. Sollace claims his business generates approximately $60,000 annually in net income. However, our investigation shows cash transactions and unreported revenue streams that suggest the actual figure is significantly higher." My mouth went dry. They'd been investigating my business, probably for weeks. The break-in at my house hadn't been random. It had been a cover story while they gathered evidence for this ambush. "What evidence?" Judge Morrison asked. Chen produced a thick folder. "Bank deposits that don't match reported income, cash transactions with no corresponding invoices, and testimony from customers who paid in cash for services that don't appear in Mr. Sollace's books." The courtroom spun around me like a carnival ride gone wrong. They'd been building a case for financial fraud, positioning me as a man who'd hidden assets to avoid sharing them in a divorce settlement. The reliable tech repair guy was now a potential criminal. "Your Honor," Richard said, his voice steady despite the circumstances, "we need time to review these allegations and prepare a response." "Granted. We'll reconvene in 2 weeks for a full evidentiary hearing." Judge Morrison's gavel came down like a thunderclap. "Mr. Sollace, I strongly advise you to consult with your attorney about complete financial disclosure." Outside the courthouse, Richard's composure finally cracked. "What the hell, Jared? Cash transactions? Unreported income? Please tell me this is a misunderstanding." "It's complicated," I said, the words tasting like ash. "Complicated how?" I'd been dreading this conversation for years, hoping it would never become necessary. "Some of my customers pay cash. Older folks who don't trust banks, people who work under the table themselves. I've been flexible about reporting requirements." "How flexible?" "Maybe 20% of my income isn't properly documented." Richard closed his eyes, probably calculating how much this admission would cost both of us. "Jared, that's tax evasion. If they can prove it, you're looking at criminal charges, not just a divorce settlement." The weight of my stupidity settled on my shoulders like a lead blanket. Years of small compromises, cash payments tucked away for emergencies, the gradual erosion of ethical boundaries that happened so slowly I'd barely noticed. Now, it was all coming back to destroy me. What do we do? Damage control, full disclosure, cooperation with investigators, and hope Judge Morrison is feeling merciful. Richard gathered his papers with the mechanical movements of a man whose day had just gotten much worse. And pray that Ayla doesn't decide to turn this over to the IRS. I drove back to my shop through streets that felt like a maze designed to trap me. Every corner held potential witnesses to my financial shortcuts. Every customer might be someone Chen's investigators had already interviewed. The business I'd built with my own hands was now a weapon being used against me. Jenny looked up as I entered, her expression mixing concern with something that might have been disappointment. "Rough morning?" "Getting worse by the hour." "Jared, we need to talk. Some woman came by yesterday asking questions about cash payments and off-the-books work." My stomach dropped another notch. "What did you tell her?" "Nothing. But she knew things, specific details about customers and transactions. Someone's been talking." I spent the afternoon reviewing my books, trying to calculate how much unreported income Chen's investigation might uncover. The numbers were worse than I'd remembered. years of small compromises adding up to a substantial sum that would look deliberate and systematic to a judge. Around 4 p.m., my phone rang. Ayla's number, not the anonymous one she'd been using. "We need to talk," she said without preamble. "Through lawyers. This is bigger than lawyers now. Meet me at Murphy's Tavern in an hour." "Why would I?" "Because if you don't, I'm calling the IRS tomorrow morning." The line went quiet, leaving me staring at a phone that had just delivered an ultimatum. Ayla had found her leverage, and she was prepared to use it. Murphy's Tavern was nearly empty at 5 p.m., just a few regulars nursing beers and watching baseball highlights on the ancient television. Ayla sat in a corner booth, looking smaller and more fragile than I'd seen her since the divorce proceedings began. "You came," she said as I slid into the opposite seat. "You threatened to destroy my life. Seemed worth a conversation." Danny Kowalski approached with 2 beers, setting them down without comment before retreating to give us privacy. The kind of discretion that came from years of witnessing other people's disasters. "I never wanted it to go this far," Ayla said, her fingers tracing patterns in the condensation on her glass. "Funny way of showing it. Margaret Chen was Trevor's idea. He said we needed leverage, something to force a fair settlement." "Fair?" The word came out harsher than I'd intended. "You abandoned our marriage, tried to steal my house, and now you're threatening criminal charges. What part of that is fair?" She flinched, but didn't look away. "You cut me off completely. No money, no access, no way to survive. What was I supposed to do? Come home. Act like a wife instead of a refugee. To what? A man who'd turned cold and vindictive? You changed, Jared. The moment I sent that text, you became someone I didn't recognize." The accusation lingered between us like haze from a fading fire. She was right, in a way. The accommodating husband who'd enabled her choices for 22 years was gone, replaced by someone firmer and more deliberate. "People change when they're betrayed," I said, "and people make mistakes when they're confused and scared." We sat in silence, 2 people who'd shared a life now staring at each other across an unbridgeable divide. The beer tasted flat, like everything else about this conversation. "What do you want?" I asked finally. "Half the house value, spousal support for 2 years, and your promise not to contest the settlement." "In exchange for?" "I convince Margaret Chen that pursuing the tax evasion angle isn't worth the cost. The investigation goes away, you keep your business, and we both move on with our lives." It was a reasonable offer, probably better than anything I'd get from a judge who'd seen evidence of financial fraud. But accepting it meant admitting that Ayla had won, that her betrayal and manipulation had been successful. "I need time to think." "You have until tomorrow morning. After that, Margaret files her report with the court and sends copies to the appropriate federal agencies." I finished my beer and stood to leave, then paused at the edge of the booth. One question. Was any of it real? The marriage, the partnership, the life we built together? Ayla's eyes filled with tears that might have been genuine. All of it was real. That's what makes this so hard. "No," I said. "What makes it hard is that you threw it all away for a fantasy that lasted about a week." Outside Murphy's Tavern, Edgewater's evening quiet felt oppressive. The town that had been my home for 40 years now felt like a prison, every street corner holding memories of a life that no longer existed. I drove to the lake outside town, parking at the overlook where Ayla and I had come during our first year of marriage. The water stretched toward the horizon like a promise of escape, but I knew there was no running from the choices I'd made. My phone buzzed with a text from Richard. "Call me. We need to discuss options." But I already knew my options. Accept Ayla's terms and spend the rest of my life knowing she'd outmaneuvered me, or fight and risk losing everything to criminal charges and federal investigation. 22 years of marriage, reduced to a choice between humiliation and destruction. I sat by the lake until the sun set, watching the water turn from blue to black while I decided which kind of defeat I could live with. The decision came to me in the pre-dawn darkness of my garage, surrounded by tools that had never lied to me and machinery that responded predictably to the right inputs. I'd been awake all night, turning Ayla's ultimatum over in my mind like a broken part I was trying to repair. But some things couldn't be fixed. They could only be replaced. At 6 a.m., I called Richard Henley at home. "I'm taking the deal," I said without preamble. "Jared, we should discuss." "No discussion. Half the house value, 2 years spousal support, clean divorce. Set up the meeting." Richard was quiet for a long moment, probably calculating billable hours lost to common sense. "You sure about this? We might be able to fight the tax allegations." "Might isn't good enough. I want this finished." "I'll call Trevor this morning." I spent the day at my shop, going through the motions of normal business while my world reorganized itself around the reality of surrender. Customers brought their broken devices, I fixed what could be fixed, and life continued with the mechanical precision of a clock that had lost its emotional significance. Jenny watched me with the careful attention of someone monitoring a potentially unstable situation. "You okay?" "Fine. You've been staring at that phone for 10 minutes without touching it." I looked down at the device in my hands, a simple screen replacement that should have taken 5 minutes. Instead, I'd been holding it like an artifact from a civilization I no longer understood. "Just tired." "Want to talk about whatever happened in court?" "Nothing to talk about. Sometimes you lose." The settlement meeting took place in Trevor Maddox's conference room, a sterile space with expensive furniture and motivational posters that probably cost more than most Edgewater residents made in a month. Ayla sat across from me, flanked by Trevor and Margaret Chen, like a general with her advisors. Richard spread the settlement documents across the polished table with the resignation of a man who'd seen better battles. Standard terms. House sale proceeds, split 50-50. Spousal support of $1,500 monthly for 24 months. All claims waived. "And the business investigation?" I asked. Margaret Chen smiled with professional satisfaction. "Closed. Our client is satisfied that complete financial disclosure has been achieved." Complete financial disclosure. The phrase was code for, "We got what we wanted without having to prove anything." Ayla had successfully extorted a settlement using the threat of criminal charges she probably couldn't have made stick. I signed the papers with a steady hand, each signature sealing my defeat. 22 years of marriage dissolved into asset divisions and payment schedules, love reduced to accounting. "There is one more thing," Ayla said as we prepared to leave. I looked up from the documents, wondering what final humiliation she had planned. "I'm sorry," she said, "for all of it. The text, the lawyers, the way this ended. You deserved better." The apology hung in the air like smoke from a fire that had already consumed everything worth saving. Too little, too late, and probably calculated for maximum emotional impact. "Yes," I said. "I did." Outside Trevor's office, Richard attempted damage control. "This isn't as bad as it feels. You keep the business, avoid criminal charges, and start fresh. Plenty of men have rebuilt from worse." "Sure they have. What's your plan now?" I looked across Edgewater's struggling downtown, past empty storefronts and faded signs advertising businesses that no longer existed. The town was slowly fading, like a patient whose family couldn't bring themselves to accept what was coming. Sell everything and leave. "Jared." "It's over, Richard. The marriage, the business, this place. Time to find somewhere that doesn't know my story." That evening, I sat in Murphy's Tavern with Danny Kowalski, drinking bourbon and watching the local news report on a factory closing in the next county. More jobs lost, more families scattered, more evidence that the world I'd grown up in was disappearing one bankruptcy at a time. "Heard you settled," Danny said, refilling my glass without being asked. "News travels fast." "Small town. People talk." He leaned against the bar, studying my face with the careful attention of a bartender who'd seen every variation of human disappointment. You don't look like a man who just got divorced. How should I look? Angry, relieved, something. You look like you're at a funeral. Maybe I was. The funeral for the person I'd been, the life I'd built, the assumptions I'd made about loyalty and partnership, and the basic decency of people you trusted with your heart. She won, I said. Did she? From where I sit, she traded a good man and a stable life for whatever Wade's offering. That sound like winning to you? I considered this while bourbon burned away the taste of legal documents and forced apologies. She got what she wanted. What she thought she wanted. Different thing entirely. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Thank you for being reasonable. I hope you find happiness. A. I stared at the message, then deleted it without responding. Reasonable, as if capitulating to extortion was a virtue rather than a necessity. The next morning, I called Patricia Morrison and put the house on the market for real this time. No injunctions, no legal complications, just a simple sale that would cut my final tie to Edgewater and the life I'd thought I was living. Market's still strong, Patricia said as we walked through rooms that felt like museum exhibits. Should move quickly at the right price. Price isn't important, speed is. She made notes on her tablet, probably calculating commission on a sale that would happen faster than usual. Any particular reason for the rush? Fresh start. Where are you thinking of going? I'd been considering that question for days, researching places where a man with technical skills could disappear into anonymity, somewhere without small-town gossip networks and shared histories that defined you before you opened your mouth. West, maybe? Colorado or Arizona. Somewhere with more sky. The house sold within a week to a young couple from Cleveland who saw potential in Edgewater's affordable real estate and didn't know the stories attached to the property. I signed the papers in Richard Henley's office, then wrote Ayla a check for her half of the proceeds. You don't have to deliver this personally, Richard said. Yes, I do. I found her at Wade's apartment, a cramped space above the hardware store that smelled of old dreams and recent disappointment. She answered the door wearing clothes I didn't recognize, her face showing the strain of adjusting to a life that hadn't matched her expectations. Jared, I wasn't expecting your half of the house sale. I handed her the check, watching her eyes widen at the amount. Minus the spousal support I'll be paying. Thank you. Don't thank me. This is what you demanded. She looked past me toward the Mustang parked at the curb, loaded with boxes and everything I couldn't bear to leave behind. You're really leaving? Nothing left here for me. The business. Sold to Jenny. She's got vision and energy. Things I seem to have misplaced. Ayla stepped onto the landing, closing the door behind her. Where will you go? Does it matter? It matters to me. I studied her face, looking for traces of the woman I'd married 22 years ago. She was still there, buried under layers of poor choices and rationalized betrayal, but not someone I recognized anymore. Colorado, probably. Denver's got plenty of tech work, and nobody there cares about my story. Jared, Goodbye, Ayla. I walked away before she could finish whatever apology or explanation she'd prepared. Some conversations didn't need endings, just the recognition that they were already over. The Mustang started with a satisfying rumble, engine purring with the contentment of machinery that knew its purpose. I drove through Edgewater's quiet streets one final time, past the coffee shop where retirees would soon be discussing my departure, past the courthouse where my marriage had been legally dissolved, past Murphy's Tavern where Danny Kowalski would probably toast my escape. At the town limits, I stopped and looked back at the place that had been my home for 40 years. The morning sun cast long shadows across familiar streets, making everything look smaller and more fragile than I remembered. My phone buzzed with a final text from Ayla. I hope you find what you're looking for. I typed my response carefully. I already did. It was never here. Then I deleted her number, put the Mustang in gear, and drove toward whatever came next. In the rearview mirror, Edgewater grew smaller until it disappeared entirely, like smoke dissipating in clean air. Behind me lay the wreckage of 22 years, the settlement that had cost me everything I'd built, and the woman who'd chosen nostalgia over the life we'd created together. Ahead lay interstate highways and mountain ranges, cities where nobody knew my name or cared about my failures. Places where a man could rebuild himself from scratch, one honest day at a time. The Mustang ate up miles with mechanical precision, carrying me toward a horizon that held no promises except the ones I was willing to make to myself. No more accommodating other people's dreams at the expense of my own dignity. No more believing that loyalty was a currency that retained its value when spent on the wrong people. Just the road, the engine's steady rhythm, and the hard-earned wisdom that sometimes the best revenge was simply refusing to play a rigged game. I drove until the sun set behind me, painting the sky in shades of ending and beginning. Somewhere ahead lay Denver or Phoenix, or whatever city would become home to the person I was becoming. The person who'd learned that smoke and mirrors only worked until someone turned on the lights, and I was done living in the dark.